still remember the day I arrived at Blackwood University, excited to start my freshman year. The campus was bustling with activity as students moved into their dorms. I made my way to room 237 in Hawthorne Hall, eager to meet my roommate and settle in. As I pushed open the creaky door, I was greeted by an empty room. Half of it was bare, while the other side had my belongings neatly stacked. I shrugged it off, thinking my roommate was running late. Days passed, and still no one showed up. I asked my RA about it, but she just gave me a strange look and said, "Oh, you're in 237? We must have made a mistake. You don't have a roommate this semester." At first, I was thrilled to have the room to myself, but as the nights grew longer and colder, I began to feel uneasy. It started with small things, items moving when I wasn't looking, my belongings rearranged. I tried to rationalize it, blaming my own forgetfulness or the drafty old building. Then came the whispers. Late at night, when the dorm was silent, I'd hear faint murmurs coming from the empty side of the room. It was as if someone was having a conversation, but the words were just out of reach. I'd jolt awake, heart pounding, only to find the room empty and still. But the air would be frigid, and I swear I could see my breath, even though it was barely autumn. As weeks passed, the strange occurrences intensified. One night, I woke to find all my textbooks scattered across the floor, pages fluttering in a non-existent breeze. Another time, my laptop turned on by itself, playing an old song I'd never heard before. The most terrifying incident happened when I was studying late. I felt an icy touch on my shoulder, and when I spun around, I saw a fleeting shadow dart across the room. I couldn't take it anymore. I needed answers. I confided in my friend Lisa, who'd been at Blackwood longer than me. Her face paled as I described my room number and the eerie events. "Room 237?" she whispered. "That's where it happened last year." With trembling hands, Lisa pulled up an old news article on her phone. My blood ran cold as I read the headline. "Blackwood University student found dead in dorm room." The story detailed how a freshman, Emily Chen, was discovered in room 237 under mysterious circumstances. The cause of death was never determined, but rumors of foul play circulated. I felt sick. Was Emily's spirit still lingering in her room? Was she trying to communicate with me? That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing with questions. Suddenly, the temperature dropped dramatically, and I heard a clear, feminine voice whisper, "Help me." Terrified but determined to uncover the truth, I began investigating Emily's death. I scoured old newspaper articles, social media posts, and even sneaked into the university archives. Slowly, a disturbing picture emerged. Emily had been a bright, popular student, but in the weeks leading up to her death, she'd become withdrawn and paranoid. Her last social media post chilled me to the bone. "Something's not right here. I don't feel safe anymore." It was dated the day before she died. As I delved deeper, I started experiencing vivid nightmares. In them, I saw flashes of Emily's final moments, a dark figure looming over her, a struggle, a scream cut short. I'd wake up drenched in sweat, the room ice cold, with a distinct feeling that I wasn't alone. One night, as I was about to give up and request a room change, something extraordinary happened. I woke to find my laptop open, a blank document on the screen. As I watched, frozen in fear and fascination, words began to appear as if typed by invisible hands. It wasn't an accident. He did it. "Professor, dark hair, glasses, basement office, find the truth." The message vanished as quickly as it had appeared. My heart raced. Could this be Emily, finally able to communicate? I knew then that I couldn't leave. I had to solve this mystery, not just for my sake, but for Emily's too. Armed with this new information, I redoubled my efforts. I discreetly asked around about professors matching the description, careful not to raise suspicion. It didn't take long to identify him. Professor Blackburn, a renowned but reclusive literature professor with a basement office in the old English building. I started observing him, noting his movements, his habits. There was something off about him, a darkness that seemed to cling to him like a second skin. Once, our eyes met across the quad, and the malevolence in his gaze made me stumble backward. As I dug deeper, I uncovered a pattern. Every few years, a student would mysteriously vanish or die under suspicious circumstances. Each time, Blackburn was somehow connected, but never directly implicated. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. Emily wasn't his first victim. and if I didn't stop him, she wouldn't be his last. One night, gathering all my courage, I snuck into Blackburn's office. The basement was dark and musty, filled with ancient books and strange artifacts. As I rummaged through his desk, I found a hidden compartment containing a leather-bound journal. My hands shook as I opened it, revealing pages filled with disturbing writings and occult symbols. Suddenly, the temperature plummeted. I heard footsteps approaching. Panic seized me as I realized I was trapped. Just then, Emily's presence enveloped me, and I heard her whisper, "The window, now." Without thinking, I lunged for the small basement window, squeezing through just as the office door creaked open. Heart pounding, I ran back to my dorm, clutching the journal. I spent the night poring over its contents, uncovering a horrifying truth. Blackburn was practicing dark magic, sacrificing students to extend his own life and power. Emily had discovered his secret, and it had cost her her life. The next morning, I took the journal to the police. At first, they were skeptical, but the evidence was irrefutable. Blackburn was arrested, and as they led him away, his eyes locked onto mine with a look of pure hatred that will haunt me forever. In the days that followed, the atmosphere in room 237 changed. The cold spots disappeared, and the whispers faded away. One night, I woke to see a faint, shimmering outline of a young woman standing by my bed. Emily's spirit smiled at me, mouthed a silent thank you, and then faded away, finally at peace. As I finish writing this, I'm preparing to move out of room 237. The university has decided to convert it into a storage space. Too many students refuse to live here after what happened. But I'll never forget my time here, or the ghostly roommate who changed my life forever. To those who might scoff at this tale, I say this: there are more things in heaven and earth than we can ever comprehend. And sometimes, the line between the living and the dead is thinner than we'd like to believe. So if you ever feel a cold presence or hear a whisper in the night, pay attention. You never know whose story you might need to tell. Finals week, the most dreaded time of the year for any college student. I was no exception, desperately cramming for my exams in the musty corners of the university library. It was late, and the building was eerily quiet. As I searched for a psychology textbook, my fingers brushed against something odd, a yellowed piece of paper tucked between two massive volumes. Curiosity got the better of me. I pulled it out, realizing it was an old exam paper. But this was no ordinary test. The questions were written in a strange, flowing script, interspersed with bizarre symbols I'd never seen before. Something about it sent a chill down my spine, but I couldn't look away. As I read the questions aloud, barely above a whisper, the air around me seemed to grow colder. The symbols began to shimmer, as if alive. Suddenly, a piercing pain shot through my head, and I dropped the paper, gasping. That night, the nightmares began. Horrific visions of grotesque creatures, shadows with razor-sharp claws, and an overwhelming sense of dread. I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat. But the terror didn't end there. Throughout the day, I saw things, awful things, that nobody else could see. Ghostly figures in the corners of rooms, blood dripping from walls, and heard whispers that made my skin crawl. I knew something was terribly wrong. This wasn't stress or lack of sleep. The exam paper had done something to me, and I needed to find out what. Desperate for answers, I returned to the library the next day. The exam paper was gone, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I approached the ancient librarian, Ms. Winters, hoping she might know something about the strange document. Her face paled when I described the paper. "Oh dear," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You've awakened it." She led me to a hidden room filled with dusty tomes and told me a chilling tale. The exam, she explained, was part of a curse cast by a vengeful professor decades ago. He had been fired for his unorthodox teaching methods and occult research. In revenge, he created this cursed exam that would drive students mad with terrifying visions and eventually claim their souls. "But why haven't I heard about this before?" I asked, my heart racing. Ms. Winters sighed. "The university covers it up. Every few years, a student stumbles upon the exam and, well, it never ends well." As she spoke, the room seemed to darken. Shadows danced in the corners, and I could have sworn I heard faint, maniacal laughter. My head throbbed, and for a moment, Ms. Winter's face transformed into a grotesque, demonic visage. I stumbled backward, nearly falling over a stack of books. When I looked again, she was normal, concern etched on her wrinkled face. "You don't have much time," she warned. "The curse is already taking hold. You must break it before it's too late." "How?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Find the professor's grave," she said. "Destroy the original exam paper buried with him. It's your only hope." As I left the library, I knew my life depended on what I did next. The next few days were a living nightmare. The visions grew worse, more vivid and terrifying. I could barely distinguish reality from hallucination. In my classes, I saw my professors morph into monstrous creatures, their words becoming unholy chants. My fellow students appeared as rotting corpses, their eyes black and soulless. Sleep became impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I found myself in a hellish landscape, chased by shadows with gleaming teeth and razor-sharp claws. I was losing weight, my skin taking on a sickly pallor. Friends started to avoid me, whispering that I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had, but I knew the truth. I had to break this curse before it broke me. I spent every waking moment researching the vengeful professor. Finally, I found a lead, an obituary from 30 years ago. Professor Malcolm Johnston, buried in the old Oakwood Cemetery on the outskirts of town. As night fell, I made my way to the cemetery, armed with a shovel and a flashlight. The air was thick with fog, and an unnatural silence blanketed the area. No crickets chirped, no owls hooted, just the sound of my ragged breathing and pounding heart. I found Johnston's grave, a modest headstone nearly obscured by overgrown weeds. As I began to dig, the visions assaulted me with renewed vigor. The ground seemed to writhe beneath my feet, and ghostly hands clawed at my ankles. "You're too late," a voice hissed in my ear. "Your soul is mine." But I couldn't give up. I had to keep digging. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time had lost all meaning. My muscles screamed in protest as I dug deeper and deeper. The visions were constant now, a kaleidoscope of horror that threatened to overwhelm me. Finally, my shovel struck something solid. A coffin. With trembling hands, I cleared away the dirt, my flashlight revealing a simple wooden box. This was it, the moment of truth. As I pried open the lid, a foul stench assaulted my nostrils. Inside lay the desiccated remains of Professor Johnstone, clutching a leather-bound book to his chest. The original exam. I reached for it, but suddenly the corpse's eyes snapped open. Its jaw dropped in a silent scream, and a swarm of insects poured out, engulfing me. I stumbled backward, swatting frantically at the biting, stinging creatures. When I looked again, the coffin was empty. The book lay on the ground, its pages fluttering in a non-existent wind. As I picked it up, the cemetery around me began to warp and twist. Gravestones melted like wax, and the ground beneath my feet turned to writhing shadows. "You think you can break my curse?" Johnston's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere. "You're just another foolish student, destined to join my collection of tormented souls." The book in my hands grew hot, and I could feel it pulsing with malevolent energy. I knew what I had to do, but my body wouldn't respond. It was as if invisible strings were pulling me, forcing me to open the book. "Read it," the voice commanded. "Embrace your fate." With the last of my willpower, I fought against the compulsion. This was my last chance. Summoning every ounce of strength I had left, I slammed the book shut and threw it to the ground. I fumbled for my backpack, hands shaking as I retrieved a bottle of lighter fluid and matches. "No!" Johnstone's voice roared as I doused the book. The shadows around me coalesced into a monstrous form. Johnstone himself, a towering figure of darkness and rage. He lunged at me, but I was faster. I struck the match and dropped it on the book. The flame caught immediately. An inhuman shriek filled the air as the book burned, the fire an unnatural blue. Johnston's shadow form writhed in agony, slowly disintegrating as the pages turned to ash. Suddenly, it was as if a veil had been lifted. The cemetery returned to normal, the oppressive atmosphere vanishing in an instant. I fell to my knees, exhausted but relieved. It was over. As dawn broke, I filled in the grave, erasing any evidence of my night's work. I made my way back to campus, feeling lighter with each step. The visions were gone, the whispers silenced. In the following days, I learned that I wasn't the only one affected. Other students reported that their nightmares had suddenly stopped, and the oppressive cloud that had hung over the university lifted. I never told anyone the full story of what happened that night in the cemetery. Who would believe me? But I know the truth. I faced an ancient evil and survived. The cursed exam is no more, and Professor Johnstone's reign of terror is finally over. But sometimes late at night, I still hear a faint whisper. There will always be another exam, another student. This isn't over. I never thought joining a fraternity would lead me down such a dark path. As a freshman, I was eager to make friends and create lasting college memories. When I received a bid from Alpha Omega Kappa, one of the most prestigious fraternities on campus, I was thrilled. The brothers seemed friendly, and the house was impressive. Little did I know, I was about to uncover a terrifying secret that would haunt me forever. The first few weeks of pledging were typical: cleaning the house, running errands for the brothers, and learning about the fraternity's history. But as time went on, things started to feel off. The hazing rituals became increasingly intense and bizarre. One night, we were blindfolded and taken to a remote location in the woods. The air was thick with the scent of pine and something else I couldn't quite place. When they removed our blindfolds, I saw the other pledges standing in a circle around a strange stone altar. The senior brothers wore dark robes, their faces obscured by shadows. My heart raced as I realized this was no ordinary fraternity ritual. The chanting began, low and guttural, in a language I didn't recognize. That's when I saw the knife, ancient-looking and covered in strange symbols. As they grabbed one of my fellow pledges and dragged him towards the altar, I knew I had to find a way out before it was too late. I tried to convince myself it was just an elaborate prank, but deep down, I knew better. The next day, the pledge who had been taken to the altar was nowhere to be found. When I asked about him, the brothers just smirked and said he couldn't handle the pressure and had dropped out. But I saw the dark glint in their eyes. They were hiding something sinister. Over the next few weeks, I started digging into the fraternity's history. Late at night, when everyone else was asleep, I'd sneak into the library and pore over old yearbooks and newspaper archives. What I discovered chilled me to the bone. Alpha Omega Kappa had a long history of mysterious disappearances and unexplained deaths dating back to its founding in 1888. One night, while searching through a dusty box of fraternity memorabilia in the attic, I found a leather-bound journal hidden beneath a floorboard. The pages were yellowed with age, filled with disturbing sketches and rambling text. It belonged to one of the fraternity's founders, and it detailed a pact made with an ancient entity, a deal that required regular sacrifices to maintain the fraternity's power and success. As I read, a floorboard creaked behind me. I spun around to see 3 senior brothers standing in the doorway, their eyes glowing an unnatural red in the dim light. "You shouldn't be up here, pledge," one of them growled. "You've seen too much." I knew then that I had to escape, or I'd become their next sacrifice. My mind raced as I looked for a way out. The attic window was my only option. Without hesitation, I sprinted towards it, crashing through the glass and tumbling onto the roof below. The brothers shouted in anger, their voices distorting into inhuman growls. I scrambled down the side of the house, my hands bleeding from the broken glass, and ran into the night. For days I hid in abandoned buildings and alleyways, always looking over my shoulder. I tried to go to the police, but they dismissed my story as a prank or the ravings of a stressed-out student. No one believed me, and I realized I was on my own. I needed proof to expose the fraternity's dark secrets. Under the cover of darkness, I snuck back into the fraternity house, armed with a small camera. The place was eerily quiet as I made my way to the basement, an area that had always been off-limits to pledges. As I descended the stairs, the air grew thick and musty. The walls were lined with strange symbols and ancient artifacts. At the far end of the room stood a massive stone door, covered in intricate carvings. I approached it, my hand shaking as I raised the camera. Suddenly, a low rumble filled the air, and the door began to open. What I saw behind it defied all logic and sanity. A swirling vortex of darkness pulsed with malevolent energy, and I could hear whispers in that same ancient language from the woods. Paralyzed with fear, I couldn't move as tendrils of inky blackness reached out from the vortex. They seemed to sense my presence, writhing and grasping at the air. I finally snapped out of my trance and turned to run, only to find myself face to face with the fraternity president, his eyes now completely black. "You've come so far, pledge," he said, his voice echoing unnaturally. "Why run now? Don't you want to be part of something greater?" His words seemed to slither into my mind, tempting me with promises of power and knowledge beyond my wildest dreams. For a moment, I felt myself being drawn in, the darkness calling to something deep within me. But then I remembered the missing pledge, the long history of disappearances, and I knew I couldn't let myself fall into their trap. With every ounce of willpower I had, I shoved past the president and sprinted up the stairs. The entire house seemed to come alive, shadows clawing at my heels as I ran. I could hear the brothers chanting, their voices growing louder and more frenzied with each step I took. I burst out of the front door and ran across campus, not daring to look back. The chanting faded, replaced by the sound of my own ragged breathing and pounding heart. I didn't stop running until I reached my dorm room, locking the door behind me and collapsing on the floor. As dawn broke, I realized with horror that in my panic, I had dropped the camera. My only evidence was gone. In the days that followed, I tried to lay low and blend in with the other students, but I could feel eyes on me everywhere I went. Sometimes I'd catch glimpses of the fraternity brothers watching me from across the quad, their faces twisted into unnatural grins. At night, I'd wake up to find strange symbols carved into my door, gone by morning. I knew I couldn't stay at the university. With no proof and no one to believe me, I was a walking target. I withdrew from my classes and prepared to leave campus for good. As I packed my bags, there was a knock at my door. My heart stopped. Had they finally come for me? Cautiously, I opened the door to find a USB drive taped to it. There was a note attached. "You're not alone. Run." I plugged in the drive and found dozens of files, testimonies from former pledges, photos of ritual sites, and even fragments of that ancient text I had seen in the basement. I didn't waste any time. I copied the files, sent them to every news outlet and law enforcement agency I could think of, and then I ran. I've been on the move ever since, never staying in one place for too long. Sometimes I see the symbols from the fraternity house in my dreams, and I wake up in a cold sweat. I don't know if exposing their secrets will be enough to stop them. All I know is that the darkness is real, and it's always searching for new victims. So if you ever receive a bid from Alpha Omega Kappa, run. Run as fast and as far as you can.